this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Friday. Kick off the Winter Olympics in style with the opening ceremony from Italy, featuring a special performance by Mariah Carey. Celebrate the greatest athletes from around the globe as they come together to go for gold.
Lindsey Vonn, sensational!
The opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics.
Ilya Malinin. Redefining the sport.
Friday at 8 Eastern, 7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
Body Bags with Joseph Scott Moore. You ever have family members that you lose contact with? I know I do. You know, there are people that when I was a child, we actually played together. It would generally be around Thanksgiving or maybe Christmas or maybe a family reunion, perhaps. And you would cross paths with them, and you felt as though that with these folks in your life that you would always know them, particularly when you're young. You remember happy times and that sort of thing, running and playing. And these are people generally that are not in your life day after day, but you know that you're related because your parents have told you that. Sometimes I really long for that. I would like to reconnect, but you know, as time goes by, you don't. And it seems as though they just kind of vanish into the ether of life, and you lose contact, you lose any kind of frame of reference for them. All you have are these kind of images in your mind that are blurred after all of these years. Today, we're going to dig into a case that was known to have been an unidentified lady that was found actually in Ontario, Canada, in kind of an isolated area back in 2005. And as a result of the fine work of our friends at Othram Labs in the Woodlands, Texas, they have resurrected her from the grave. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. Dave, you're bound to have a cousin or two out there that you have not had contact with in some time, right?
Yeah, I'm sure. I say that because, you know, as you were talking about that, I'm thinking of, I have different friends who have cousins and what have you that they grew up with, like you were describing, and then they don't have contact anymore. I didn't grow up that way. Our family was really scattered early on, right, so I didn't have those. But I always liked my friends that had their cousins and would, you know, just when they had a family get together, there'd be 30 people, you know?
Yeah.
And they were all related. I always thought that was the coolest thing.
It is kind of cool. It's like you, and here we go, we're going to be talking about genetics today, but you have that genetic familial connection. Sometimes I wonder if it's almost at some kind of base level that we have that we're not aware of, maybe in our conscious mind necessarily. We don't understand why we like these people perhaps. Now, I know there's people out there snickering in the audience right now because they're thinking, I've got plenty people in my family that I would not snicker about. As a matter of fact, I'd probably have steam coming out of my ears if I knew that I had to spend time with them. But let's focus on the happy part of it.
Right.
There's some kind of connection there. There's some kind of, and I don't know if it's from a biological perspective or it's because you've been told by your parents that you're related and that they are kin, right? You know, that they're a cousin, perhaps.
They are more than friends. This is a blood thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's an interesting thing to think about. And I think in the modern world, we are so separated from one another. But you think back to years and years ago where people would kind of stay put in one location and the family kind of extends out eccentrically from, grandma's house, where you got grandma's house and then you've got all of your cousins that kind of geographically have spread out over that period. And you have the ability to get together. But now, the world that we're in, it's getting more and more diffuse, if you will. It's just spread out further and further and further. And I don't know if there's any way to recapture kind of that magic that we once had.
Well, now there's social media platforms that allow for an extended family to actually maintain a relationship that's not nearly as close as what you're talking about, but it is there. We've kind of traded that. And I agree, there probably would be a whole lot more fun and a lot more depth to our character if we had those personalized, one-on-one, not online, in the real world, having a cookout for the 4th of July with the whole family there.
Yeah, or in my case, having my cousin from Texas hit me in the face with a football and my nose was bleeding at Thanksgiving. So, yeah, you don't.
There you go.
Facebook and X and all those things don't necessarily capture those moments or the pristine images that we see on Instagram, where everything is perfect and beautiful.
When you were talking about this a minute ago, and I was thinking about our case today, and I was wondering how many of her loved ones wondered, when did you see her last? What happened to her? Where did she go? Because she's got family. No matter, we talk about victims all the time on this show, and you and I will point out that they have a mom or a dad, a brother, sister. They've got a child. People that actually care and love them who don't know where they are, and really don't have a way to find out. Maybe filing a missing persons report, February 7th, 2005. You file it because you can't find your loved one. And 8 months after you file the missing person report, well, Rockwood Jane Doe is found.
Yeah. Yep.
And Rockwood Jane Doe is found in a rest, I guess it's a rest area like we have here in the U.S. I don't really know. Right. I haven't been to Canada, but it was called a rest area in a picnic area of this rest area out the highway. And in this picnic area, underneath a sleeping bag, a body was found. They called the body remains. And the remains that they found in August of 2005 did not have any ID, no jewelry. And the clothing that were associated with the remains were purchased from a store about 400 miles away from where the remains were found.
Yeah, and let me point this out real quick. Those, when you say from where the remains were found, those items of clothing were actually purchased in Montreal. So now, if you think she's found in Ontario, Dave, and if you think about it, you're talking about Quebec, which is back to the east of this location. So that would indicate to us perhaps, well, I guess she could have, you think she could have gone into maybe a thrift store, perhaps Goodwill or something like that, whatever their equivalent is, maybe a Salvation Army store in Canada and purchase something there. But, clothing is a big issue here. Let me kind of run these down. She didn't have jewelry, and that's not always the case. You don't always think. I think a lot of people, and we make note of this. All right, in our reports and investigations, was the subject of wearing jewelry. Well, not everybody wears jewelry. I think that there's this kind of running narrative that people believe that all women wear jewelry, but every now and then there might be a significant piece of jewelry that the individual might wear, maybe a pendant, maybe a ring that has been passed down from the family. But with her remains, there was no jewelry found.
Before you dig further, can I ask you very quickly, Joe?
Yeah, sure.
Calling the body remains, does that have a significant meaning? Because it's different than saying her body was found, the unidentified female. Wow. Right. Saying remains makes me think we're not talking about what I would think of a body that died in her sleep last night and we found under the sleeping bag today.
Yeah, and when it comes from a law enforcement agency, it's in the vernacular. You think about maybe a funeral director somewhere saying we're going to, take charge of the remains. We're going to, and you think about it from that perspective. But when you think from law enforcement or from a forensic standpoint, the first thing that comes to mind, there was a book that was written many years ago by Cornwell. I think that's called All That Remains. Okay. And that thread runs through this. And you think, well, if you're saying remains, that kind of implies all that's left behind. Now, you can look at that spiritually and say, right, well, this is the shell, the vehicle for our soul. It's absent the soul, and this is all that remains. Or from a scientific perspective, if you're looking at, say, for instance, skeletal remains, which we say that, and that's very definitive, because if we say skeletal remains, that means that there's no soft tissue. Right. And that all we have is a skeleton. And as we've talked about before on body bags, Dave, there is not necessarily, it's hard for me to remember any time I've ever recovered a skeleton and it was a completely intact skeleton. There are always going to be elements missing. Mm-hmm. So what they're having to work with here are skeletal remains, perhaps, that they're having to deal with. The important part, I think, from an ID perspective, what you're going to want, obviously, is the skull. I think that the other elements of the skeleton are very, very important. But, Dave, if we're trying to get somebody ID, the most important thing that element that we would really like to have is going to be the skull. All
right. So in talking about remains,
yes,
we are talking about bones found under the sleeping bag.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And again, that takes on kind of a sinister air when you think about it. When you're observing a body at a scene, and say, for instance, you find them beneath, it's all semantics, right? You find a body beneath a sleeping bag, that doesn't necessarily mean they were in the sleeping bag, okay? Does that mean that perhaps the body was, or all that remained, the skeletal remains, were covered with a sleeping bag and then kind of discarded and left behind? If I have somebody that is found within a sleeping bag, and even if they're partially skeletonized or totally skeletonized, which, by the way, I've never had a case like that, in a sleeping bag, you entertain the idea that if they're in repose, perhaps during the night, maybe they died as a result of some kind of natural event, but being covered with a sleeping bag. And that's kind of an action word, isn't it? We're going to cover something. If they're covered with a sleeping bag, maybe you're trying to obscure from view. You're trying to inhibit someone's ability to actually see what's left behind. So how does she wind up here in Ontario? She's wearing clothing that is from Quebec, specifically from Montreal. She winds up in this location, kind of an isolated area. And Dave, I think you'd probably agree, even though you've never been to Canada, there's a whole lot of open space in Canada as far as the eye can see. I think I was reading something not too long ago, and it was showing proportionally where people are concentrated, the population is in Canada. And it's those population centers are roughly just north of the U.S.-Canadian border. Okay. And it varies, in miles northward that it extends up, but along that space right there, that's where most of the population is. And so it's not a densely populated area, but you have a clue here in the sense that it's found along a roadway, that this area in which she's found in. Now, was she camping there by herself? Was she camping with somebody else? I don't necessarily know that we will ever know the truth about that. But what I do know is that when the Canadian Mounted Police investigators began to work this case, they knew that they had a female. They knew that she had been there for some time. And there was evidence, Dave, that she had sustained quite a bit of trauma to her skull.
Friday. Kick off the Winter Olympics in style with the opening ceremony from Italy, featuring a special performance by Mariah Carey, Celebrate the greatest athletes from around the globe as they come together to go for gold.
Lindsey Vonn, sensational!
The opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics.
Ilya Malinin.
Redefining the sport.
Friday at 8 Eastern, 7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
Brother Dave, let me ask you a question. You ever come across somebody in your life? There's two parts to this. First off, when you see them, you look at them and you assume what their age is. And maybe in certain circumstances, you say, wow, this person must be 25 years old. But yet you find out later that they're like 35 years old. And then conversely, you run into somebody that you believe might be 40 and they turn out to be like 30. Has that ever happened to you? You're shocked when you find their age?
I don't even want to name the number of times. It's so bad for me, Joe. I stopped assuming because I'll look at somebody and think, rode hard and put up wet maybe, but this person, based on what you know of their background, limited. It's just I've been wrong so many times, that I'm at the point now.
My wife, Kim, she always laments the fact that she was in that group of people in high school. I don't know if you remember this, but she was that specific group in high school that the drinking age when she graduated from high school was 18, and she knew that, and she graduated when she was 17, started college when she was 17. And then she knew that if she made it to 18, she'd be able to drink. Well, they bumped the year up again, and then they bumped it up again, and then they bumped it up again. And the thing about it is, during that period of life,
right,
she always looked like she was like 16.
Oh yeah,
the entire
so she doesn't
time.
Win. She's getting
no,
she
everything. Doesn't. And she would always, she always goes on about it. And me, I think I got my first gray hair when I was like 18 years old.
Yeah.
All right. So I've been at this for a while. People have always assumed that I was ancient. But the thing about it is that when you recover a skeletal remain, here's the pieces to this, just so you understand. We do what's called sexing, and what that means is we look at the elements of the skeleton and try to determine what sex the body is that we have. Here's some interesting terms. With males, the bones will tend to be robust, and with females, I love this term. I absolutely love it. Female skeletal remains will be what are referred to, you ready, as gracile, which means fine. And I don't mean like, oh man, she's so fine. I mean like fine, like dainty, that sort of thing. And so we use those two terms. And then we race the skeleton, and certain racial groups will have very specific appearances with them from an anthropological perspective that you can try to peg down. And then on top of that, we do aging of the skeleton. And let's face it, I mean, if you were to see my skeleton right now at the age that I'm at, I might look like I'm 80 as opposed to my real age. And it's because all of the wear and tear, joints, that sort of thing. It's hard to do one of these assessments. But when they discovered Jane Doe's remains, this is the best they could do at the time. Are you ready for this, Dave? This is how broadly this was initially reported. They thought, they knew that they had a female, and this is the age range, as young as 25 or as old as 45. Dude, I don't know about you, but for me, you talk about 25 and 45, that's a huge gulf, when you begin, and how do you narrow down from an investigative standpoint? How do you begin to narrow down those numbers? So you've got maybe you're looking for a missing female in Canada. Oh, and we have her skeletal remains, and she is 25 to 45.
Right.
Well, gee, thanks. Can you give us something more than that?
You know what I was thinking? In the last couple of years, we have seen a number of celebrities who, Christy Brinkley comes to mind, who you see them and they do not look their age. She's in her 60s and looks like she's in her 30s.
Yeah.
But that's not the bones we're looking at. We're looking at her skin. We're looking at what's covering the bones. And so it's tough to determine her age. But the bones, I was thinking about this because I thought that's a huge birth between 25 and 45. But from an age perspective and how we grow and things like that, isn't it about the age 25 when we stop adding on good parts of our body and start diminishing, starts going down?
You'll start. Yeah, that's kind of accurate. You begin to see kind of the wear and tear of life. Everybody that's in the sound of my voice right now, do yourself a favor. Take the tip of your tongue and run it around the surface of your teeth and see if you can determine, because this is actually one of the things we look at with skeletal remains, see if you can determine what side of your mouth you are dependently chewing on. Okay, so let's just say, like, I can run the tip of my tongue over the right aspect of my mouth, over the surface of my teeth. Those teeth are precipitously worn down compared to the left side of my mouth. So I chew on the right side of my mouth. Well, given my specific age and that level of wear, you know that I'm at a more advanced age than, say, a 20-year-old. You know, you think back to when you're 20 years old, your teeth were almost still like puppy teeth. You know, puppy teeth are very sharp, you know, if they bite you or whatnot. One of the other things, and I actually did a paper on this when I was in college. I took I had audited actually a course at, I don't know why in the world they let me do this, by the way, at LSU Dental School. As an undergraduate, they let me audit a course. I was working for the coroner down there, and the guy that taught the class was actually an oral pathologist, but he was also a forensic odontologist, which means he did bite mark assessment and also identity of victims. I did a paper on palatine suture wear in attempting to age specific population. I'll tell you what that is. It sounds very fancy, but it's really not. The roof of your mouth, which is actually your hard palate, is a hard, bony structure. And did you know that you have suture lines in the roof of your mouth, just like you do on the top of your skull? And so on the roof of your mouth, over the years, as you eat, those suture lines, you look for what's referred to as suture obliteration, which means they begin to wear down. And did you know your skull, like when you were being formed in mommy's tummy and all of those plates of your skull began to come together, you've got there's an anterior fontanelle, which is the soft spot on the top of your head that's forward. And then there's two fontanelle. The other soft spot, it's in the back of the head. The skull begins to fuse at that point in time. If you ever see a skull, it looks like interlocking teeth. It's a marvel. It's absolutely a marvel of creation where they kind of lock together like this. Those suture lines in your skull actually obliterate as well. So if you get a skull and you're examining it at the scene and you see that the suture lines are kind of obliterated or worn down, kind of common sense, you know that this person's older. And you say, well, how's a skull get worn down underneath your scalp? Well, just think about every time you've ever combed or brushed your hair, every time you smiled or frowned, all of these things, your skin expanding, contracting, all these sorts of things, any kind of trauma you've sustained, it actually wears on the surface of your skull. Isn't that amazing? And so we look for those little nuanced areas when we find a skull. I find it interesting that in this particular case, they've got a very broad age range here, Dave. We're talking 20 years, right?
That's a big one.
20. That is a very big one. So I'm wondering how many actual elements did they have to examine? And that's very important that they had the skull. The fact that they had the skull gives us an idea as to perhaps the way that they were able to finally kind of frame this. They knew that they had a female from Jump Street. Now, It's unclear if they actually had a pelvis, which is one of the big ways that we identify male versus female. The pelvic girdle is wider in females because it has to allow for the birth canal. Right. That's just the nature of it. And so if you're absent if you're absent the pelvis, you can actually look at the skull and get an idea, particularly if you'll touch above your eyes where your brow line is. Men have these kind of robust brow lines. I always envision myself very primal, when I think about it. But women's are more, that word, gracile.
Wow.
So they didn't have confusion over the sex, but they had a lot of confusion apparently, or not as much information regarding the age, Dave.
All right. Now, one thing they did know about the skull was that this person had pretty massive damage to her left cheek, her nose, and eye socket that all had been broken before her death because they were able to see that they had time to heal while she was still alive.
Yeah.
Now, is that a part of where you could look at that from an aging standpoint?
Oh my gosh. Yes, absolutely. Because I think people think that if you break a bone, it's going to remain separated. Our bodies are such a marvel that the bone actually, it wants to fuse. It wants to fuse with that other portion. Now, listen, the fusion that you get is not going to be necessarily what you want. Remember, I think it was just last week we did an episode regarding the elderly woman that had gone over the bridge with her sister and another man, and she had one leg that was actually shorter than the other. Remember, she had a untreated. Oh gosh, this makes my skin crawl. She had an untreated fractured tibia. And she had to wear an orthopedic shoe because one leg was shorter than the other. Look, nature's going to take its course. And what they're seeing here, that she's got this much trauma, and there's two pieces to this that I think are very important. First off, you can kind of get an idea, particularly for a forensic anthropologist that's certainly more trained in this area than I am. I've just merely assisted them and am fascinated by forensic anthropology. It's one of my favorite things in forensics. You can get an idea of this healing that takes place in a natural state. So what this means is that you're going to have this kind of weird looking fusion of the bones where the edges are, I don't know really how to describe it. Okay, here's a way to describe it. The next time you go to the grocery store, look at a head of cauliflower, okay? And when you look at the cauliflower, it's got very kind of that, the beige part's got a very textured look. Right. That's kind of the way bone looks as it's healing on its own. It's not like you've got an orthopedic surgeon that's going in there and is kind of molding this and they're going to plate it together or bind it together in some way that they might surgically, and it's going to fuse, and where the thing is all lined up, it'll be skewed. So you've got that, and they can do a calculation as to how long this has been going on because they know how long it takes roughly for bone to heal. Now, some of that stuff is dependent upon your own genetics, upon nutrition. It's a big part of bones healing specifically, and lack of usage, or did they continue to try to lead a normal life as his bone is broken? The other piece to this is kind of the unknown piece. If this subject, who we know is female, has had this much damage to, give me those areas one more time. That was the cheek.
Specifically, it was her left cheek, nose and eye socket.
And her eye socket. So she's had an orbital fracture, right? Which is that kind of ring that surrounds our eye, the bony ring that surrounds the eye. And there's interconnectivity with the nasal bone as well. All this stuff is related to one another. And then you have what's referred to as the cheekbone, which is going to be inferior to the orbital socket. So that tells me that she sustained some kind of, probably, Dave, some kind of specific trauma. And we're talking about, I would think at least, like some type of blunted trauma that would strike her in the face very forcefully. So are we looking at somebody that maybe was in some kind of horrendous fall? Maybe they were in a car accident. But if you were in a car accident and you sustained this kind of trauma, you would think that you would be removed by an ambulance to a hospital where they would treat you. Maybe she left AMA, against medical advice. Who knows? But in life, Dave, because they're saying these have been healing. Mm-hmm. So in life, she would have a very distinctive disfigurement to her, or there would have been something there might even be the possibility on that left aspect of her face, the lower lid could have drooped, in her eye, and she would have this kind of droopy eye on one side, or maybe she was misfigured or disfigured in some way. So she would have been, if people knew her in life and they saw her walking about, they would say, wow, I remember her. She's had like serious facial trauma. And it's one thing if you break your shoulder and it doesn't heal correctly, or you fracture a rib and it doesn't heal correctly. That can be closed. That can be kind of guarded. Dude, there's no way to obscure your face.
Friday. Kick off the Winter Olympics in style with the opening ceremony from Italy, featuring a special performance by Mariah Carey. Celebrate the greatest athletes from around the globe as they come together to go for gold.
Lindsey Vonn, sensational!
The opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics.
Ilya Malinin.
Redefining this sport.
Friday at 8 Eastern, 7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
Not everybody, but most people have somebody out there that cares about them. You might not realize it, but you do. In this particular case, where the Ontario Provincial Police had essentially named this unidentified set of human female remains as Rockwood Jane Doe, they felt as though that somebody knew her. And Dave, just for a second, I wanted to revisit what the police believed had happened to her, because as it turns out, she was actually found in this kind of camping area, woody area, and she was wearing a pair of black shorts, beige tank top, white underwear, peach-colored bra. That would give us an indication if she's wearing, listen, if you're in Canada and you're wearing black shorts, that gives us an idea that perhaps the period of time of year when she died may have been in the warmer months. So, we're looking for things in what I refer to as our investigative funnel that kind of narrow things down from an informational standpoint. So that would be a big, chronologically at least, or timing wise, that would give us an idea that based upon the clothing that she had on at the time, that it was warmer. Because I don't know about you, but I can only imagine how nippy it gets in Ontario, Canada in the wintertime. We're talking about sub-zero freezing, this sort of thing. And the police say that she apparently was in the sleeping bag because they felt as though it had been drugged some distance from an adjacent area and placed there.
Wow.
So to this point, this is not, they're still investigating this case as a suspicious case.
Right.
But with all cases, Dave, if you don't have an ID specifically who this person is, we can talk all day long about anthropological findings as it applies to the body. We can talk about trauma and all that. That still doesn't get us any closer to what may have happened. And I think in this particular case, we've got good news because she's been identified. We know who she is, Dave.
It's interesting that you were talking about how, she was dragged, and because they say her death is considered suspicious.
Yes.
I'm thinking the way they had phrased it with the body found under the sleeping bag and description of the short pants and things like that. And they're able to come up with, because we know they discovered the body in August of 2005. And according to police, they say that they believed that her body had been drugged about a month before her remains were found. And I'm just kind of curious, how could they determine? We know we have a set of remains that the best we can come up with is a 20-year framework between the ages of 25, 45, female. We know she's had a lot of facial damage in life that has healed. How could they even figure out that at some point she probably was dragged a month before her remains were found? That just seems odd to me.
Yeah, it does seem odd. I think for me, what they're looking at, you could do it two ways. First off, we look for drag marks on the ground. That's a common thing that we do at crime scenes just to confirm everybody, because that comes up in the press quite a bit. Were there any drag marks? You hear that a lot. You can have drag marks on the ground that you can appreciate. However, here's a piece that you might not have thought about. Clothing and any instrument such as a sleeping bag or blanket that's used to facilitate this is going to show evidence of a dragging because it transfers when that underlying dirt, for instance, if you're going over a dirty surface, that transfers in these kind of striated streaking marks on the undersurface of something. In particular, just think about it. If you've ever drugged something on your own that's heavy, as you're dragging it along, you're picking up bits of earth with it, and it makes striations, or they're streaks, linear like this, that are parallel and linear, and they're running on the undersurface. I would think that maybe the undersurface of whatever she was contained in had given them an idea that she was drugged to that location, and then someone attempted to obscure her. So the reason they're investigating this as a suspicious death is that
she didn't drag herself to that spot.
She didn't drag herself there and then cover herself up. So they're thinking somebody had a hand in this. There's somebody out there that had an awareness of what brought about her death. But, the first step in any case, particularly in a homicide investigation, and I would imagine our friends in Canada, that's what they're faced with right now, or were faced with, they got a big piece to this now, is trying to determine specifically who they are. And listen, if you don't have any ID on you at all, and you're in, your body is at least partially skeletonized, I would assume fully, then all you're left with are these skeletal remains. You have to do whatever you can from a biological standpoint to try to get the body identified. And they've met now with great success because of our friends at Othram, Dave.
I'm so blown away by what Othram does. I'm so thankful that you have taken time to explain these to me. I wish y'all could know some of the conversations we've had away from the show, because there's so much there that they are doing. But as we explain the case of another Jane Doe being named, all I can think of is how Othram, the amount of time that is spent to do this kind of work, it is so intense that the scientists are only allowed to work a certain amount of time. There's a time limit before their brain can't handle. They have to be stopped. I say, Joe, you've got to take a break. And it's because of the intense work. But the fact that it's not some world government funding that helps with this. It's always crowdfunding on the individual case. And that's what, to me, I'm thinking of all the things in this world that we fund, with tax dollars. This would be one that would be well worth the investment. And until then, we're going to keep telling you about the great work Othram does, because if you've ever dealt with a loved one that was missing for any length of time, you know that pain, you know the emptiness. And Othram is actually providing answers to families on a daily basis. Just like this family, they did report her missing. In February of 2005, Rockwood Jane Doe was reported missing. Not as Rockwood Jane Doe. She was reported missing by her actual name. The remains were recovered in August of 2005 and remained unidentified for how many years, Joe? 18?
Yeah, at least 18 years. And they were able to get, this is the beauty of it, they were able to harvest DNA sample from what remained of her. Now, it's unclear at this point in time where this this harvest took place from, this acquisition of DNA material. And keep in mind, what our friends at Othram have to do is, let me see, how can I put it? I don't want to I don't want to go into the spiritual realm here, but it's almost a miracle at the level that they operate in, because they don't. It's not like they show up. You know, like anybody that's ever had like one of these DNA tests done online, you're talking about a DNA test where you're taking it from a sample from the mouth, where they do the cheek scraping. That's very rich DNA that they're utilizing here. That's not what you have in forensic cases. They're having to take something, and the middlemen's at David Middleman and his wife Kristen, they have developed a specific methodology to go in and harvest this DNA from bone or teeth or wherever they can acquire it from. Maybe sometimes if hair is still existent, they can go in there and take this DNA and kind of replicate it, if you will, to try to build out a profile on an individual. So it's not just the harvesting of the sample itself, but it's also involving, now get this, involving your cousins. Remember how we talked about cousins early on, Dave? With family and that sort of thing. Cousins lead us back to the answers here. And in the case that we're talking about today, we're talking about a woman who has been identified as Tammy Penner. Now, this is what's so interesting about her case. And Dave, geographically, we know that she was wearing clothes from where? Do you recall? Where did she get this? Montreal.
400 miles away in Montreal.
Yeah, from where her body was, the clothing that she had was purchased in Montreal. I just want to paint this picture for the listeners so that they understand what a massive area this is. 400 miles away in Montreal, this clothing that she's wearing is acquired. She's found dead in Ontario. That's not where she's domiciled. Dave, she's domiciled on the Pacific coast in British Columbia. All right. That's where her journey actually started. This is a massive area. That's what's so striking about this case. And so when Othram was able to actually harvest this sample and begin to go through all of their testing, they were able to conclude vis-a-vis forensic genetic genealogy, they were able to build out a family tree and determine who she was. Now, how horrible is it if we reflect back how horrible it is that, we lose touch with these people who, maybe from childhood that we cared so much about, that we loved and thought for that moment in time that we would be together forever. Unfortunately, life doesn't work that way. It just doesn't. We drift apart. We lose touch. But in the end, it's our genetics that do, in fact, keep us connected. And in this case, at least the mystery of who she is has been solved. What's important now is to try to determine who exactly it was that had something to do with this woman's death, if they knew about it or if they perpetrated it. Make sure that you check out our friends at Othram. That's OTHRAM.com. OTHRAM.com. And keep this in mind. They don't take a nickel from the government. Everything they do is self-funded. If you want to make a difference in this world, there are thousands upon thousands upon thousands of unidentified bodies all across our nation and all around the world that Othram is willing to work on, but they are heavily reliant on our donations. So please take a moment, check out their website, and see if there's any way that you can help out. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.